Parshas Vayishlach has a feel of a transition parsha. Vayetze is Yaakov's parsha, the parsha that Yaakov emerges, builds his family, struggles with Lavan, escapes from Lavan, and the prodigal son returns home. Vayeshev Miketz Vayigash Vayichir, of course, the conclusion of Yaakov's story and saga, and sad, tragic saga. As Rashi writes in the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, Bikesh Oto Tzadik Oso Tzadik Leishev B'Shalva V'Kafzo Lavrogza Shel Yosef. Vayishlach has this transitional feel. Waiting at the gates, violently opposed to Yaakov's return to Eretz Yisrael as Esav. He still wants to recover the Bechorah. The Bechorah, of course, incorporates the right to live in the land of Hashem under the eye of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Somehow the confrontation with Esav is deferred. Ad Achris Hayamim, until Achiavo Seira, as the Torah alludes to, till a future date. Then, of course, Yaakov falls into the clutches of the people of Shechem. And when that subsides, and doesn't seem to have long-term ramifications other than Shimon Velevi's eliciting the ire of Yaakov, he ends up resolving that crisis. The end of the Parsha paves the way for Parshas Vayeshev. Now, how do you pave the way for Parshas Vayeshev? Well, you describe Esav's genealogy, and you move Esav off stage, which would be the way to read the end of Vayishlach, assuming the Torah didn't dedicate 43 psukim to Esav's genealogy. You have to be sensitive in the Torah in general, and in Bereshis in particular, Sefer Bereshis, for these redundant, lengthy, verbose lists or extra text that we don't need. Like in Chayei Sarah, I mentioned a few weeks ago in the Shir in Chayei Sarah, why is the description of Eliezer's journey and expedition so laborious, so painstaking in its detail? Now, sometimes the lists, especially the genealogical lists in Sefer Bereshis, are meant to be a pyramid structure. Asar daros me'adam ad Noach. So generation, 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 generation. All they do is live to a certain age, have children, live out their lives. No discovery of Hashem, no advance of the world. And then finally, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'darasav. So the genealogical lists in the end of Bereshis lead to the apogee. Or, Asar daros mi Noach ad Avraham. The genealogical lists in the end of Noach lead to Nahor and ultimately Avraham. But these lists in Vayishlach, they aren't leading anywhere. Yaakov isn't part of the genealogy of Esav. It's not like we're building up to that descendant who's the chosen one, who's the promised one. They're just very extensive lists of Esav and his family. Now, part of the reason is that if you read between the lines, you appreciate the importance of family. Shelo asanu kigoyei haratzos, v'lo samanu k'mishpachos ha'adama. And we'll see Yaakov work and toil to build his family and to keep his family together. And unfortunately, he doesn't always succeed because of the rivalry between Yosef and his brothers. But you see family in complete disarray in Esav's world. And the contrast between the end of Vayishlach and Yaakov's efforts in the rest of the Torah is striking. And I'll just quote two examples of family dysfunction, and they both surround sexual malfunction or sexual betrayal or debauchery, degeneracy. One is the sordid story of Eliphaz, our good friend Eliphaz, who we last saw chasing Yaakov according to the Medrash in the beginning of Vayetze. And Eliphaz, actually the son of Esav, father of Amalek, Eliphaz grabs the wife of Seir, Mrs. Seir. Seir is the land that Esav relocates to, Har Seir, which evidently was named after the leaders, Aluf Seir, who was married. So Eliphaz steals his wife, snatches his wife. And their child is, of course, Timnah. Now, we all know that Timnah wanted to be a part of Avram's entourage. Avram refused. So she ended up becoming Eliphaz's, her father's Pelegesh. Remember, Eliphaz had relations with the wife of Seir, Mrs. Seir. Their daughter is Timnah, but Timnah's daughter becomes his Pelegesh. Not exactly the type of family dynamics we'd all aspire towards. And it gets even more ugly in the case of Tzivon, the son of whoever Sivon's mother was, but he has relations with his mother, and their child, Sivon and his mother, beget a child, or Sivon fathers a child called Anna. So that means Anna is quoted twice. Ayin Nun He is quoted twice in the story, once as Sivon's child, once as Sivon's brother, because they share a mother, of course, because Sivon committed adultery with his mother. So you just read it, and you read between the lines, and you appreciate Jewish family, family values, family integrity. To a degree, you appreciate the anger and the fury of Shimon and Levi as to the Dinah incident and the defilement or the contamination of Dinah. But those in-between-the-line stories of sexual misbehavior and familial malfunction and dysfunctional families, they're not enough to justify 43 psukim. Remember, there are entire sections in Shas that are parchos ba'avir, the Gemara says in Chagiga. There are entire sections that hardly have any textual anchor. Halachos upon halachos, tilei tilim shel halachos. So why would the Torah waste 43 psukim just to highlight the malfunction of Esav's family? There has to be a different message. And the message of the end of Vayishlach, and this whole to-do, in this transitional Parsha, is incorporated in two cryptic psukim. Pasuk Vav in Parak Lamed Zayin. Vayikach Esav es nashav v'es banav v'es benosav v'es kol nafshos beisav v'es mikneo v'es kol bemtov v'es kol kinyano sherechash be'eretz Canaan. That's a mouthful. His children, his wives, his entourage, his avadim, the cattle, everything he purchased in Israel. Vayelech el eretz mipnei Yaakov aviv. Here is the ambiguous part. He travels to a land, an undisclosed land, because of Yaakov. What role did Yaakov play? Which land was he traveling to? We know the answer to neither. Vayelech el eretz mipnei Yaakov achiv. Because of Yaakov, he travels to a different land. The next pasuk is even more ambiguous. Ki hayarechu sham rav, too many cattle. V'lo yechla eretz megurihem l'seisel sam, and the land of their dwelling couldn't bear them. Mipnei miknehem. Sounds a little bit like Lot, but Lot just distanced himself from Avram. He moved to Sdom. He moved to the Yam HaMelech area. It's hard to believe that in those days, it's not like the land was so overpopulated. So there's something bubbling beneath the surface. It's not just because they each had too many cattle and the land couldn't contain all their livestock. So Rashi says that there's something else afoot. There's a different reason Esav leaves, and it's not because of a logistical concern that there's not enough pasture land for their cattle. Rashi says, and I'll paraphrase and I'll read the Rashi, Esav faced the following choice, which is fascinating to imagine. Esav could have been part, maybe as an ancillary, as a subsidiary or auxiliary part of Jewish history, helping Yaakov, assisting Yaakov. This is not Parsha's told us, but so many Mefarshim assume that was Yitzchak's plan. Yitzchak wasn't a fool. Yitzchak knew who Esav was and who Esav wasn't. Yitzchak knew who Yaakov was and who Yaakov wasn't. He envisioned a partnership. He envisioned them working together, something which eluded Yitzchak, but hopefully Yaakov was able to establish with the 12 tribes, the 12 sons. But Esav also realized that there's a price of admission to the land of Israel. And that price of admission was based on the story that his grandfather told him. We know that Avram dies early, Chazal tell us, because Hashem didn't want to subject him to Esav's Yotzei Letargos Ra, but they met each other, they knew each other. Avram told Esav, or Esav heard some other way, about the origin story of Jewish history. Namely, the Bris Bein Abisarim. In the Bris Bein Abisarim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu awards the land to Avram Avinu. Avram had asked, if you remember, Bama Idaki Rashana, which doesn't mean that Avram was distrusting Hashem. He was just asking for a roadmap, for details. It just seemed so unlikely and improbable. I just finished a war with 4 kings and 5 kings. They seem to be entrenched. They seem to be powerful. And Hashem describes the Bris Bein Abisarim, which is a gloss of Jewish history, and Jewish history is patterns and templates, and they repeat themselves. And Hashem tells Avram, Ki ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem, v'avadim v'inu osam. which means both they will struggle to establish sovereignty in this land, and they will also have to go to exile. Remember, exile is in part, the Egyptian exile, the Galus Mitzrayim, is in part a response to the breakdown and the moral misbehavior of the brothers during the incident of Esav, Mechiras Yosef. I'm sorry, not Esav, Yosef. But in part it's forecasted ahead of time, and it's part of Jewish history, and certainly the struggle to establish our presence in the land of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not incidental, it's not a punishment, it's because everyone knows this is the land of Hashem. Everyone knows subliminally, subconsciously, we are the people of Hashem, and when the people of Hashem live in the land of Hashem, Malchus Hashem advances, and not every human being wants to embrace Malchus Hashem. So they fight a proxy war with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's representatives, and they attack us. So the whole story of Ger Yezaracha Be'eretz Lolahem, which is before Mitzrayim, which is about struggling to establish sovereignty and autonomy, and then Vavadim Vino Osam, even when we leave Eretz Yisrael, we're still persecuted and discriminated against. That's built into Jewish history. That's built into our role. It may not have had to been that way. Had we stayed in Eretz Yisrael, we would have represented Hashem from the comfortable environs of our own land within our own borders, but it still would have elicited hostility because we challenged the world morally and we challenged the world monotheistically. And Esav said this whole thing called Jewish destiny and Jewish mission and Jewish land, it looks attractive, but the shtar chov, the debt, the ticket, the price, Rashi's language is Mipnei Yaakov Achiv. He doesn't flee because Yaakov is bullying him or pushing him away or his cattle or cornering him. Because of the fearsome burden of Jewish history that Yaakov was willing to embrace, was willing to accept, and Esav wasn't. Amar, and here we eavesdrop on Esav's reasoning. Eilach li mikan, I don't want to be part of this country and its mission and its destiny. Ein li chelek, lo b'matana shenitin lahaaretz hazos, I don't want the gifts and the legacy and the privileges of living in the land of Hashem, with Hashem. V'lo b'piron hashtar, and I don't want to, of course, because I don't want to pay the debt and the heavy price. So he flees. He runs away. Mipnei Yaakov Achiv, because he can't face the same responsibility and historical mission that Yaakov is willing to face. And that's why we don't know where he's traveling to. We know, we'll find out in the rest of the parak, but in this iconic pasuk, Vayelech el Eretz, it's not important where he's traveling to. It's where he's traveling from. He's fleeing from Eretz Yisrael. He's fleeing from historical responsibility. He's fleeing from mission. Where he's traveling is not important. He's looking for suburbia. He's taking his kids, his wife, his cattle, all of his possessions, and that's why this is such an abundant and affluent pasuk. He chooses affluence and comfort over abundance, over historical mission, historical sacrifice. And that's why the Torah sweeps him off stage with 43 psukim. While Yaakov continues the struggle, Be'eretz Migureim, the first pasuk of next week's Parsha, Vayishlach Yaakov Be'eretz Migurei Aviv, the land that his parents lived in, the legacy land, Esav doesn't want to live in an Eretz Migurim. He wants polished malls and manicured lawns. He wants the safety and security, the comfort and the luxury of suburbia. So we're not interested right now where he's traveling to. That doesn't interest us right now. We'll get the details from his travel agent. What does interest us is that he's fleeing Jewish history. And of course I spoke about this in Parsha's told us that this is chronic and classic Esav. Hine anochi holech lamos v'lama zali b'chora. I'm going to die. Why should I take responsibility? Why should I help other people? Very selfish, very self-centered, very arrogant, very dismissive towards other people. Lama zali b'chora. Why should I take mission? Why should I take responsibility? So Esav checks out from Jewish history. It's a fascinating Rashi. The impression is Esav had a choice. The impression is, had he been more idealistic and more visionary, more selfless and more devoted, he may have opted in, and he would have had an ancillary role to his brother Yaakov, but he opted out. So this is the Torah's message, 43 psukim, sweeping Esav into the dustbin of history, paving the way for Yaakov, who in contradistinction to Esav, Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Migurei Aviv Be'eretz Canaan. Of course, this is also interesting because this is the intersection where Judaism and Western civilization / Christianity, which becomes the dominant Western civilization part, and to a degree, Western civilization as represented by their forefather Esav, the grandfather of Edom, the grandfather of Rome, surrenders Eretz Yisrael to Yaakov after these encounters, the beginning of the Parsha, and then of course Yaakov's not on stage here, but Esav's making a decision. And to a degree, that's why the Christian world, in the end, has finally made peace. And to a degree, it's always made peace. They rarely oppose Jews returning to Israel. They're opposing it now, but much of the Christian world supports it, unlike the Islamic world, because Yishmael never ceded Eretz Yisrael. Remember, Christianity accepts the Bible as the original work, and we are the people of the Bible, we're people of the land. They add to it. Islam doesn't accept it. It revises the Bible, and there's no point in which Yishmael cedes or acknowledges Yaakov's right to the lands. That's why our struggle with Bnei Yishmael is very different from our struggle with Bnei Esav and Western civilization. But in a broader level, we all face the Esav question. I have the schus to live in Eretz Yisrael. I'm speaking to you now from my house in Gush Etzion. It is not a privilege I take for granted. I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving me that privilege. I know how tenuous life is in Eretz Yisrael, and how quickly it could change. I also know that life is complex, and decision-making is complex. And I bristle when Israelis are dismissive to people who don't move to Israel, without realizing how complex and complicated life can be. Now people have various reasons for not living in Israel, being in Israel, without delineating them. It's not my place. Everyone knows what the reasons are. There could be external forces and pressures, internal reasons, family reasons, marital reasons, financial, a million different reasons why people don't come home. And that's a decision that each person makes in the quiet privacy of their own soul and their own conscience. The question is, do you flee from Israel? Flee from Israel in the practical way, and flee from Israel in a metaphoric way. Because it seems very attractive to find a quiet bedroom community, build a shul, build a school and services, and settle into a quiet life. Israel is very dusty. Israel is very challenging. History is very challenging. And when I say Israel, I mean history. And as people have found out the past year since October 7th, history will find you. You can't run from Jewish history. History will find you. Jewish history will find you. And are you able to engage in Jewish history, recognizing the price that Jewish history demands, but are appreciating the glory, the eternity, the mission, the destiny, the redemptive, ennobling qualities of living through Jewish history and living in Jewish history? Or do you flee? Do you flee in real terms? You don't come to Israel enough and you try to stay away from Israel when you need to be in Israel? Or do you flee attitudinally and you check out when you should be checking in, and your heart isn't sufficiently engaged in our battle and our struggle? I want to be more specific. There's a lot to say about this, and I hope I hope people understand the question. It's a very, very harrowing and haunting question. Are you Esav or are you Yaakov vis-a-vis your relationship with Eretz Yisrael? And that has nothing to do with how ritualistically and religiously attendant you are and how many Blat Gemara you learn. And it's more of a, do you see yourself as part of Jewish history when it demands of you a price? And Esav, once he realized the price, he just didn't want it. Vayelech el eretz mipnei Yaakov achiv mipnei shtar chov. Eilech li mikan, ein li chelek. Lo b'matana sheniten lo eretz azos, v'lo b'pirot hashtar. 5th parak of Shir Hashirim. Finally Hashem comes knocking at the door. No more hinting and innuendo and courtship. Pischi li'achvasi rayasi omasi tamasi, open the door for me. It's cold outside. Roshinim latelk, which is up talim shchos korei. I've got icicles on my beard. Chazal say this is Hashem soliciting us to come back in the days of Ezra. What was our response? Underwhelming. Pashatati et kutanti achachel b'shen. I've already taken off my clothing. I don't want to get dressed again. Rachatzias masnai chachat tanfeim. I've already cleansed my loins, my feet, my legs. I don't want to get them dirty. The desert lands of Israel, the war battlefields of Israel, the challenges of Israel. I've got Amazon, I've got sports, I've got kosher restaurants, I've got suburbia. It's a very challenging message, and every Jew has a moral, historical, and religious responsibility to face that challenge. And it's not a geographical challenge, it's an attitudinal one. Shabbat Shalom.